Well, it's great being here, and especially I think I saw most of you 3 years ago in Austin, so it's nice to come together again. Sometimes life comes full circle. Nearly 40 years ago, I curated, with the late Barbara Rose, an exhibition called Fresh Paint, the Houston School, for the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. In organizing and writing the catalog, I drew up a list of questions about painting: first experiences, critical issues, sources and influences, formal development for each artist. I still have Kermit Oliver's handwritten in pencil extensive responses. So in many ways, I was already working on the definitive book of his life and art. I just didn't know it at the time. His words from the early 80s still reverberate with the power of someone attuned to the vibrations of the universe. He wrote, "As the years have passed, I have found a need to cloister myself from art theory and art philosophy in the contemporary context. Art has been so over-criticized that painting itself has lost the coinage of speech. I don't see any critical issues in the works. Changes are polarized around the idea of how far can the definitions of painting and media be stretched and distorted. My work is contained basically in personal experiences that predate my decision to become an artist. My works are visual remembrances expressing variations on a theme garnered from my childhood. My motivations are merely to try and craft unoriginal ideas into images as visually unique as I am capable of. I don't create in any larger context than myself and the universals of the commonplace. Sometimes you find someone who's hit a certain frequency and you recognize yourself within that frequency. With Kermit Oliver, I found that connection. It turns out that Kermit was able to identify where the culture was turning and in what directions the winds were blowing way before anybody else. I'm going to talk about the major book in progress, then show a number of images. Few of them have never been seen publicly. So this will give you a baseline of what's coming, as well as an intro to the range and scope of his art. I want to give you the tools with which to really look at this art. And I can tell you that it is deep and it is wide. Kermit Oliver, An Enduring Spirit, will be published by Texas A&M University Press, my 4th monograph, under the guidance of Tom Lemons, the phenomenal editor-in-chief. Hardcover, 400 plus pages, 200 plus full-color plates, and archival photographs. I have always maintained that Texas will never be considered a major art center until its history and its artists have been documented and honored. In a career that spans over a half century, Kermit Oliver, born 1943 in Refugio, Texas, continues to explore his gifts and tries to adapt to changing times and circumstances. Oliver is the consummate artist, redefining the possibilities of landscape, portraiture, and still life, bringing to them an intimacy, emotional vulnerability, and self-knowledge with equal authority. Kermit Oliver, An Enduring Spirit, will address the power and skill of an artist who has captured the vital impulses of the land and core issues of humanity in a visual language developed over a lifetime. This book will be the first significant publication to examine Oliver's life and art in a critical context, his prodigious breadth, great wingspan, and moral ambition. It's impossible to account for the past 6 decades of Texas art without acknowledging Kermit Oliver's commitment to craft and matchless ability to interpret people and landscapes, turning them into stories animated by his own deepest emotions. In doing so, the reclusive Waco artist puts essential truths before us, the brevity and immensity of life. Oliver is among the very few who have consistently pushed borders and boundaries in a quest for self-discovery and deep spiritual resonance. He has connected a rural upbringing in Refugio, the flatland valley of the Texas coastal bend, to roots that are at least 3 generations deep. The African Americans who had come to the region as slaves, the black cowboys, fence riders, and expert marksmen whose courage and ironclad work ethic helped establish the enormous ranches that are still owned by the original families of Spanish, Mexican, and Irish American descent. There is a paradigm shift occurring in American art. What it was, is, or could be. Categories are being dismantled, thereby providing a perfect time to examine Kermit's life and art. His haunting landscapes, portraits, and still lifes are based on classical mythology, the Bible, literature, folk tales, the sources of big themes and epic narratives, yet told from a contemporary point of view. All of the work is circuitous, making manifest a sense of place and direct experience, but also a sharpened sense of interior worlds, multi-layered and nuanced. Throughout, Kermit immerses us in a rich historical dialogue. Each work captures a moment in which the seemingly simple coexists with philosophical pondering, larger discussions triggered by stories of desire, loss, beauty, the natural world, and our place within it. All of the paintings and works on paper convey a spiritual quest that plumbs the depths of the human condition: birth, life, death, and regeneration. At their core are issues of paradox, deception, illusion, blindness, but also elements of faith, the suggestion of hope as guiding force. Kermit creates worlds within worlds, an embodiment of order, a place that we can, just through looking, move into and inhabit, where we can set up a life, experience an ideal, or contemplate uneasy mysteries. The philosophical questions that emerge from his exacting compositions deal with the enigma of our existence, our solitary state in the world, our limits in space and time. In doing so, Kermit has pursued a legacy of endurance and understanding of the magical powers of storytelling to provide both solace and transcendence. His paintings and drawings are about the search for meaning in our lives, the stories we tell others, and especially the stories we tell ourselves. His work shimmers with radiating light that both unifies the surface and defines natural forms in carefully rendered acrylic brushstrokes on panel and the near seismographic touch of graphite on paper. Rarely has ordinary existence seemed so multifaceted and enigmatic, even in its everyday details. Accordingly, the work delivers a sense of time's passing. Kermit's meticulous attention to the appearance of things and their capacity for mysterious drama yields lyric passages that evoke dreams, reflections, and memories. Throughout, Kermit's art conveys the ability to connect with viewers and show them that history belongs to and is made by everyone. For some 6 decades, he has shared his own story in a personal manner, not so people know more about him, but so they understand that they too have a story. The works explore stories about our families, our world, and the porous border between history and myth. Kermit comes across as an artist of strange and elusive probity, of memory and reflection. As the world becomes increasingly complex, chaotic, and divisive, it is vital for us to have a thoughtful, provocative context to understand our life circumstances, where we are, how we got here, and where we're going, what we value, literally and metaphorically. We hunger for genuine stories that connect us to symbol and ritual, coming to terms with our place in the world, if only to find our way forth. Oliver's method in every work is to take us away from our usual lives and then slowly, languidly bring us back home. His landscapes, portraits, and still lifes serve as focal points for a poignant yearning, functioning as an interface between near and far, known and mysterious, public and private, art and nature. Significantly, there is no other artist working in this manner with such complex layers of meaning that speak to our daily passage as human beings. Kermit wrote to me 40 years ago, quote, "I approach painting only as a means of communication, directed to the senses, to the intellect, and to the spirit. It is a touchstone to open up discourses. What I paint, I have always painted. The themes are unchanging. I paint what I understand, what I imagine, and what I see. I can only be myself and let this be distilled into my work." Along with being included in the groundbreaking Fresh Paint the Houston School, Kermit gained widespread recognition when the preeminent critic Dave Hickey included several paintings in Beau Monde for site Santa Fe in 2001. A major exhibition in 2005, Notes from a Child's Odyssey, The Art of Kermit Oliver, was curated by Alvia Wardlaw and organized by the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Oliver was recognized as 2013 Texas Artist of the Year by the Art League Houston. He was named the 2017 Texas State Two-Dimensional Artist by the Texas Commission on the Arts. He is internationally known through his collaboration with the French House of Hermes. Most recently, Kermit's paintings have been included in the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, Washington, D.C., and the focus of the exhibition I curated, Kermit Oliver, New Narratives, New Beginnings at the Art Center Waco. Throughout, Kermit has prized, above all, to follow his own light in ways that have challenged institutional infrastructure of the art market and complexities of art theory. Critics and writers have tried to pigeonhole Kermit as a folk artist, a magic realist, a pre-Raphaelite, a contemporary figurative classicist, and kindred spirit in the vein of Andrew Wyeth, all to no avail. Mysterious, poignant, and wryly reflective, Kermit draws from the vast, swift-moving, ever-flowing Mississippi River of art history. His paintings are held together by their own formal and symbolic grammar, pervaded by a kind of Byzantine stillness that overlays history and draws freely from complex visual analogies. The rhetoric of Renaissance altarpieces, 17th century Dutch and Spanish still lifes, vanitas themes, and even the romantic ideas of the peaceable kingdom. This monograph will be organized chronologically from childhood walkabouts in nature and formative religious training in Refugio to the student years at Texas Southern University and the disciplined encouragement of the art department chair and artist Dr. John Biggers to create from personal experience and native talent. His marriage to Katie in 1962, the entrance of Oliver into the Houston art scene, the first African-American artist to be represented by a major Houston gallery, DuBose. The move to Waco in 1984, where the artist worked in isolation while raising a family and administering as a longtime federal employee of the U.S. Postal Service. The text will establish Kermit in larger national and international context, situating him as a major 20th, 21st century American artist. Each reproduced work will be treated with in-depth descriptions and formal analysis, from portraits of family and friends in Refugio to the early allegories, as well as the multi-layered, extremely complex and detailed figurative art that characterizes his mature style. Separate chapters will focus on self-portraits and commissioned works, in addition to Kermit's near-visionary scarf designs for Hermes Paris. Kermit was the first American, the first African-American artist to create for this historic design house. Integral to the book is Kermit's own voice. Hundreds of hours of my recorded interviews with Kermit talking about his childhood and family, his upbringing, Texas history, flora and fauna native to the region, art, religion, mythology, and more. For the first time ever, Kermit's unwavering grace, his evangelical wisdom will be featured throughout this book cover to cover. An artist of uncompromising vision, it is important to let him speak as the ultimate and foremost source, a humble personality coming through his dynamic stories. Kermit knows that there is a dimension to history that exists in people's minds, but if we don't record and document that before it's gone, it's lost forever. Valuable legacies can disappear. The book will examine the artist's sources and influences, as well as his ongoing ability to give contemporary relevance to time-honored issues, memory, an excavation of the human spirit, and the mystery of our existence that cuts across boundaries of race, gender, age, economic hierarchy. Few artists make the world seem more wondrous than Kermit, more worthy of exploration and veneration. He takes us places we never knew we wanted to go, asks questions we never considered, and introduces us to subjects that suggest the worst and the best about us. There's a strain of melancholia in this searching, a metaphysical quest of the mysteries and terrors of nature, as well as the fragility and absurdity of human life. Why is the art of Kermit Oliver relevant in 2022? What has he seen? What does he know? And how is that manifested in the work? What can he tell us about the meaning of life, about transcendence? How do his works transport us, change us, glimpses of awareness or profound breakthroughs of revelation that linger in our conscious selves? Whose voices are heard and whose stories are lost? Such questions can only be asked in terms of revelation, a completely physical awareness of our momentary place within a broader order. Kermit's ethereal, beautiful images urge us to withdraw, to ponder what we are seeing and living, to feel a kinship with ancestral memories from deep time, to realize our interdependence and interconnections. The message of Kermit's paintings and drawings, if properly assimilated, has the potential to reconfigure our emotional, physical, and spiritual orientation in the world. In my half-century of working in the art trenches, I can honestly say that Kermit is the most astonishingly brilliant artist I've known. Artists teach us how to see. They teach us how to feel. Artists push us out of our comfort zones. The other week, Kermit and I were discussing his series of paintings which focus on the disobedient prophet. I commented that he indeed is a kind of prophet. Kermit said, "No, I'm reclusive. I send my paintings out to do the prophesying." But he is a seer, conscious of the violence people have done to each other and to the earth, a kind of wound living beneath the skin. He is also an artist who, through all the destructive centuries of our history, has kept alive the vision of peace and kindness and generosity and humility. Kermit continues to observe the world around him with curiosity and stoic acceptance. Sacrifice, atonement, redemption. To spend time with Kermit is to trod steadily down philosophical rabbit holes, the meaning of place, time's arrow, and the brevity of our existence. For Kermit, the basics of the human condition remain the same. We're born, we live, we die, and in between, we get to choose. He views creativity as a web-like phenomenon, connecting cultures and histories as sacred conversations. With an elusive grace, he is always revealing himself in the work. He collides all the contradictions built within religions and societies and helps us see them more sharply with the lacerating power that comes from never really trying to make sense. Kermit Oliver just might be one of the most radical artists of our times. So now we're going to look at some of the images, and I can tell you there's Kermit, and he's still wearing his U.S. Postal sweater. So you've had a long time to be able to look at him. I could literally talk about all of these paintings for at least an hour apiece. So I'm not giving you a post-grad course in Kermit Oliver today. You can wait for the book. But I do want to give you some of the some very important points about all of these paintings, so you get this chronological spread. And literally, these paintings are just the tip of the iceberg that you are going to find in this book. And as we go through these, I also want you to pay attention to some of the frames, very elaborate handmade frames that Kermit has made and are integral to the paintings themselves. So this is Portrait of a Shell Alienated. You see, it's 1966. He is still at Texas Southern University. He's looking at Rubens, all right, and using the same red oxide paint. When Kermit came to TSU, it's important to realize that he is from a very integrated rural community of Refugio. When he got to TSU, right in the thick of the civil rights movement, he felt isolated. This was not his experience, almost an idyllic childhood of walkabouts and nature and ranches and cowboys and Hispanics, Mexicans, Germans, Irish Americans, Anglos and blacks all living together, playing together. So he felt isolated. Portrait of a Shell, alienated. The shell is Kermit, dangling on the top of the door there. That's a hubcap, a doorknob, and a child. During this period, you'll find a lot of barren trees, children with their backs turned to us, children running away, trash barrels. Kermit was worried about the children at that time. He worked at the YMCA, and he could see the children, he could hear different conversations, the problems of the big city versus the rural communities. And so he began educating himself by not only looking through as many art history books as possible, but also reading specific authors. James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, the voice of intolerance and activism. He was also reading Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols. Again, this is not part of his, the Houston environment was not part of his experience. And so after he graduated from TSU, the work radically changed, and he was finding his way. He was using yellow ochre. This is a portrait of Katie, his wife. Again, they were married in 1962, and you can see her hand on her hip. She was, at that point, of course, drop-dead gorgeous, fashion-forward, very strong. He's got her placed in the middle of a field, anchoring her as the pivot, the foreground space, with a stump of the fence post in the back there. Very, very loose brush strokes. You're going to see this throughout, that Kermit uses his family, himself, his children, as convenient models. So this is when his art really starts changing and hitting stride. Andrew Wyeth became his touchstone. So he was sitting in the barbershop waiting for his dad, KJ, to get a haircut. Barbershop in Refugio was like the community center. Lots of magazines to read. He picks up a Ford Times, and he sees Andrew Wyeth's Roasted Chestnuts, painted 1956. All right, if you know that painting, it's a young man selling roasted chestnuts, side of the road, bitter cold. It's got kind of an ancient feeling to it. Very isolating. Kermit totally identified. And like I said, Andrew Wyeth became his touchstone, using deep browns, ochres, lights and darks, but also that affinity that Wyeth had about the harshness of the land. The other thing with Kermit, with all of this work, it's always, whether it's mythological, biblical, it's always about personal experience. It's where he's from. So this barrel isn't just any barrel. It can look figurative, the glints of light, that raking diagonal, but the barrel is really iconic. This is what the family would dip the hogs in to separate the fur, all right, from the skin. From the rural upbringing, you need to remember that the animals for Kermit were more than just pets, all right? This is a way of living. He was there at their birth, through their life as companions, and at their death. He describes their death, as like a choreographed ballet, almost like a ritual. So, along with this, you can start to see the beginnings of his symbols, his repertoire. The cloth down in the lower left-hand corner is Christ's loincloth. It can be the swaddling cloth of birth, the shroud of death, or a part of the Eucharist. The silver dish, not only for an offering, but quite literally on the farm to catch blood and entrails. The raking light, the paint, golden light, skipping strokes. The light and dark here is not just as an effect, but light as enduring. So this is a metaphor of not just the liminal state of day to night, but also of passing of existence of mankind. So here's another dust 2 years later, and he's in full swing with Andrew Wyeth, but also relating to his Refugio upbringing. And this is when he really starts to define where he's going in terms of technique. This is his uncle Skack, all right? KJ is his father's cousin. And according to Kermit, he was a lovable man, drove an 18-wheeler truck, would stop by Kermit's mother's house, mother and father's house. He was very outgoing. But I asked Kermit, I said, well, why is his hands folded? Why are his arms folded inside? And he says, well, he was a very outgoing man. He was always joking, very gregarious. But Kermit said, well, those are the strong arms that God gives the black man, the strength in those arms. What he's looking at, we'll never know, and that's part of the mystery. But again, there's the steel barrel, the dish, the pan on the lower left, the moon, which will also be a consistent symbol, and that shed over on the right with this kind of wire coming out, very lyrical, the barren tree, and then just this ether of the cloud, very crisp on the upper right. Still in Andrew Wyeth mode, dry well. So again, using ochres and browns, Kermit used the yellow ochre throughout the 70s. This, according to Kermit, refers to a ritual sacrifice of a cow each year in Africa, but at the same time, he has also seen cows like this in a field in Refugio with the swollen belly. And it really points out for our ongoing need for climate and need for water, climate control and water. But what's interesting about this is the viewer's perspective. Is the steer slipping down a ledge? Is it at the precipice of a ledge? So he puts us on very unsettling, shifting footing here. And here's one of his first self-portraits. He did some in the 60s, but this one especially is interesting because it begins to show how Kermit records himself regularly throughout his life, how he's looked at certain periods. Like he has told me, he never had any models. So he used Katie himself, the three children. They were a convenience. And also, I mean, quite frankly, he says, well, who knows himself better than Kermit himself? So here he's almost priest-like, behind a table or an altarpiece with a shell, which is a kind of baptismal symbol. Almost like markers or way stations throughout his life. And putting himself behind a ledge also puts himself a little bit at a distance from the viewer. All right, Pietà. A major theme throughout Kermit's work is the crucifixion. Peter's denial, the rooster. This one, of course, is intensely spiritual. And again, notice Kermit's handmade frame. Kermit has an astonishing command of art history. All of it from books, all right? Not from physically going to museums. The source of this painting, Kermit told me, was the Master of Avignon, which is in the Louvre collection, 15th century painting, in which Christ lays across Mary's lap with a curved back. So here you get the same kind of combination of monumentality and penetrating realism. The rooster is always Peter. The bull here represents the world. It's kind of a stark, motionless dignity. The silver, all right, the silver upper painting of this work, Kermit says, was really almost like a poor man's use of metallic art in the Middle Ages. Over to the right, what might look like in this image as a brushstroke is actually a floating paper. And that is with Kermit from the very beginning. It starts at the top of Christ's crucifixion, the INRI. It becomes the tabula rasa, the blank page that we all come into this world with and on which we write as we go through this life. And Annunciation. One thing to realize about Kermit, he's a collage painter. Everything is a collage, all right? All of these images that you're seeing come from hundreds of envelopes that he has kept over a half century and what's contained in these boxes and envelopes are thousands of clippings from magazines, newspapers, anywhere from a newspaper, a National Geographic from 40 years ago, 50 years ago, to Martha Stewart's chickens, to high art history, Caravaggio, Velázquez, Vermeer. So in many ways, he combines the low and the high without any differentiation. For me, Kermit Oliver is among our very first postmodernist artists. We live in a remix culture. Everything is up for grabs. Anything can be combined. Well, Kermit was doing that from the very beginning. He was sampling from the very beginning. So each image here is a portrait in its own right. Each image leads to another. One image leads to another. So this is a collage of his experiences, memories, and all of these collage materials become the repertoire of his characters. They are his cast of characters that he will call upon decade after decade, almost like he's having a dialogue with these clippings. Like, it's not your turn yet. Wait a minute, maybe in the future, but I'm not ready for you. This narrative does not include you yet. But here is his daughter, Christy, her hands together, white dress, and kind of this Noah's Ark at the beach. The train coming through is God the Father. The Annunciation, of course, the idea of the seed of Christ has been planted. The white line is done with precision, almost kind of like a parking lot on that beach. But look how she's standing on that white line, the turtle at her heels, the calf crossing it, still standing with its hind legs. The glass jug is reflective of the body of Christ, to be filled with liquid like a pilgrim's bottle. Okay, this headboard. And you'll see the title, Christopher with Charles Mays. Well, Charles is Charles Shorey, the late Houston artist. It turns out that Kermit and Charlie Shorey were extremely good friends, and Kermit would visit his studio every single week. So at one time, Charles had gone to the Midwest to visit a sister, and he brought back an ear of corn for Kermit, and Kermit decided to use it in this headboard painting, and you can see it over in the lower right. So this is he had been producing paintings, like I said, with his children in it, and that's Christopher on the left here. But it also goes back to Kermit's childhood setting, animals, nature, the monkey, the large moth, the mice hanging on, the geometry of this goat, the black calf who will make many appearances. And in a way that Christopher and the animals almost, they're eyeing us, inviting us into this headboard painting. It's a cruciform design, but also an Egyptian ankh, the circle with rays. And each piece, by the way, was individually cut while Kermit worked at the frame shop in Houston when they still lived there. The crab is at the center and also a circle. So it replicates a tondo. It's like a painting within a painting. The tondo represents the moon, the sun of ancient times. The heaven is the circle. Earth is the square. And this is a large untitled painting. It's also about sacrifice. You can look at this and walk by it and think, oh, wow, this is like a peaceable kingdom. Edward Hicks, Horace Pippin. But it's actually, look more closely. All right, that's a charlet. And behind the charlet is you can see the legs of a black calf. That's Christopher when he was just a couple of years old in a kind of christening, white christening gown. And you can see he's holding a blue ribbon. That blue ribbon is an umbilical cord to heaven, all right? And in the other hand, he's holding a recorder, kind of like a flute. So it's actually about leading the sacrificial bull. You see the garland of pomegranates. It's like a procession. The tree in the back, Kermit has said, is really the tree of crucifixion. So you have all of these animals. A couple of them, I think, were Katie and Kermit's dogs, a cat. There's the rooster. Poppies in the lower left-hand corner are about symbols for sleep, for death. But also, again, the symbolism of using Andrew Wyeth. This painting was directly sourced from a Wyeth young bull that stood in front of a White House and wall. But it's also, again, about Kermit's personal experiences. This is a real bull named Jeff, and it was owned by his cousin Pete Rydolph. All right, and Kermit was very clear in saying that his father, KJ, who was a master at calving, said the charlet were not good for breeding. The babies were too big for the wombs. Katie's uncle also had charlet cows. So there's always dual meanings going on here. That beautiful emerald green color. But if you look at this, it reticulates from edge to edge, black, white, dark, light. All right, and it's all about life and death. So during this period, Kermit also did a series of Western theme paintings. He grew up watching Shane with his father, Alan Ladd, looking at magazines, but he wanted to do paintings that weren't the usual Hollywood kind of take on who are the cowboys. He wanted to do Westerns from a black perspective. So that is his father on the gray horse center, KJ, Carl James, and that's his brother, Carl, older brother, over on the left here, that's kind of shifted in the saddle. There's a Roadrunner Paisano, and that's the Chaparral Cox, but also the Chaparral Cox really is also referring to the cowboys. And their hard work, their jobs. KJ started working for the ranches in the 1930s. And this is, again, like I said in the introduction, multiple generations. His father, Kermit's grandfather, working for the ranches, and we're talking the McFadden, Fagan, and O'Connor ranches that have been there since the 1830s. the grandfather drowned leading cattle across the river. Horse bolted. He became unseated, was bucked off, kicked in the head, and they found his body down the river. Great-grandfather worked as a cook, in fact, for the O'Connor ranches. So there is this kind of tradition there. So I commented to Kermit, I said, gosh, your tack is so specific in terms of bits and the kinds of saddles and even what the cowboys are wearing and all of that in terms of which bit he was using for what horse. And the tack is always specific. And he says, well, a cowboy would know. He says, I sat there and listened to all of these stories between my father and the cowboys that would come visit. And I better get this correct. They would know. So I have to attend attention to the bridles and saddles. And I also mentioned about how all of these riders would sit in the saddle, very deep seat. And he says, well, on the ground, KJ and the fellow cowboys, they were shorter, they were bow-legged. On horses, they were statuesque. And KJ was always straight back. So KJ was the last cowboy of the family. Kermit's mother, Catherine, did not want her son to grow up to be a cowboy. Very hard life. So this is another historical painting. And by the way, these two paintings I'm showing have never been shown publicly before. They're in the retired teacher system near the Capitol in Austin. This, La Bahia, wow. Kermit was looking at Jericho paintings of rearing horses. And he was also looking at Copley, Watson and the Shark. But here, he wanted to work in the tradition of heroic paintings, but he wanted the black figure not to be the victim, but the hero. So this is the Battle of Goliad, 1835. Sam McCulloch, the major figure here, was the first Texas casualty wounded in action. So in the tradition of heroic paintings, you can see that horse. That horse is as powerful as that figure. Sam McCulloch has the look of a statesman, almost a contemporary figure, like you would meet him coming down the street. Very detailed attention to his outfit, the deerskin bag, the beading, but also, again, look at the power, look at the strength it required to hold back that horse. Over on the right is kind of this motley group, and William Travis is there. They're disorganized. All of them are looking to Sam on how to attack the mission. And within that, you can see Kermit. Kermit, his own self-portrait in there, right at the horse's hocks, in between the hind legs, and Kermit included himself with that group. Very sophisticated use of space for mid-70s. Narrow ledge, on a precipice, how he sandwiched all of that in with the rifle as that raking diagonal, holding back Sam McCulloch, the horse, and the hind legs, and in between that, Kermit and this whole other group. It's full of action, and then this beautiful rendition of the mission in lower left-hand corner. And Manzo, again, this is a specific bull. He painted this for his father. As I said, his father was almost like a horse whisperer, almost really like a veterinarian in his own right, and knew about medicines, herbs, was handed down generation after generation from Africa. And Manzo here has a true presence because this was for his father, and the arch, by the way, is always heaven for Kermit. And that green his mother and father grew mustard greens in the garden and ate that a lot, and then the rabbit over in the left-hand corner. But this isn't just any cow painting, all right? This really relates when you stand in front of it, body to body, the silkiness of the ear, the wet nose, the texture of the fur. It's painted by someone who grew up with these animals, who knows them almost as equals. And I've got to tell you a kind of funny story that's part of all of this, putting this book together. So with this, of course, I interviewed Louise O'Connor and spent time on the O'Connor Ranch. She and her family were very close to Kermit's family. And at one time, Louise told me that they ran 125,000 head of cattle through there. At one point, she says, "Oh, you've got to ask Kermit about this funny story about the Brahmin." All right, well, the O'Connors brought the Brahmin over to Texas. And then next time I saw Kermit, he says, "Oh, next time you see Louise, you've got to ask her about this funny story about the bulls and the Brahmas." Well, as it turns out, the first shipment of Brahmins to Venezuela by plane, there was a stampede on the plane. And they ended up having to push out all of the bulls out of the plane over the Gulf. Well, both of them knew the same person. And it was a fisherman who would go out in the Gulf, and this guy liked to drink a little bit while he was fishing. And if you can imagine him looking up, as he thought was a very common day out on the fishing, and it was raining Brahman bull out of the sky. Kermit said he's thought about painting something similar out of that. Louise O'Connor bets that that guy never took another drink. All right, here's Katie as Belladonna and a pre-Raphaelite beauty. All right, this is Beauty in Danger. It's also about Leda and the Swan. The white cloth, again, very important. You will see that with Kermit over and over. And at this point, Christ's loincloth becomes wrapped around her red dress. This red dress, crimson red dress, almost comes alive, almost like the swans beside her. She is striding towards us with the force of unstoppable. All right, that look is determined, and she's holding a belladonna. Well, Kermit reminded me that the belladonna plant was used by Renaissance women to brighten the eyes, all right? But it was also, as we all know, a poison. So here is his Katie as belladonna, but also Leda and the Swan in a South Texas landscape. Young Christ with St. Christopher. Well, this goes back to St. Christopher crossing the water. Christ could not get across. So St. Christopher put Christ on his shoulders, waded across. In return, Christ took the staff and made it into a palm tree. That's Kermit's Christopher as a few years older from the first painting that we saw with the Charlet. And again, in the same christening, but with the sacrificial goat. Actually, this is the scapegoat. That goat represents Barabbas. The red, always sacrifice, blood. And here with the bells dangling from the horns, Kermit says he thought of the bells on the hems of priests that make noise. Well, within the garland on Christopher's head here are moths and butterflies. So all of that, here we have religion, we have myth, we have life, death, and regeneration through cocooning and the garland of flowers and a kind of innocence. And look at that handmade kind of Renaissance frame. atonement. The major painting for this is in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, but always about atonement and redemption. This is a specific person, and you'll have to wait for the book to find out who this is. But again, invading a Syrian general, beheaded by Judith on a ceramic platter. It's death, the juiciness of peaches, falling writer's dream. This is a major painting. You can see the size of it on mahogany. This is the conversion of St. Paul, the theme of violent epiphany. That dark green cloth is actually thrown off the body, and the figure departed from the cloth. The horse, again, becomes the carrier of spirit. The dog, a Cerberus kind of guardian, waiting for the spirit to cross over. Again, look at those rocks. Those are omphalos that actually Kermit got out of an Arizona Highways magazine that he's made mythological. This specific painting was sourced by Caravaggio's conversion of St. Paul in Santa Maria del Popolo. Adonis, again, combining mythological, biblical, personal experience. This figure was someone he knew in a plumbing shop in the 70s in Houston, and it's just stayed with him. He's used over and over the floating paper, the tabula rasa above. Again, the dog is Cerberus, almost ghost-like, waiting, a ghost bike with handlebars that are evocative of the wild boar, the funnel as the feminine. And of course, the owl is Athena. As Emily showed briefly, this is a major painting in Sama's collection. Again, Dutch paintings, games, vanitas, everything coming together, all of his repertoire ready to perform. But if you look at this, everything's dead, everything. It's about gluttony. It's about his comment on hunting. You can see there's the hunter's gun case empty. There's a piece of pie the hunter has already left. And Kermit is really saying, can we never have enough? The apples for Eden, cicada in the death rows, a page from Audubon, all of this, getting our eye moving from one image to another, each one a specific portrait in that South Texas landscape. Kermit is just an expert draftsman. This is a large drawing. You can see the hatching, cross-hatchings, full arm extensions, and tonalities. This is called Drowned, and it's actually Christ being lifted as a kind of baptism. And again, thinking about personal experience and recalling Kermit's religious upbringing in the Baptist church of a smaller aspect of the spirit is killed and raised up for regeneration. Orpheus, mythological and personal. The tiger is stopped in his leap. Orpheus is playing the music. Here, Kermit is what the magic of music can do. Here, it grows plants, roses, a botany book of pears. The accordion for Kermit is like an Aeolian air, an instrument of breath, like Pan's pipe. He is a seer. Orpheus has realized he's lost his love. The tiger recognizes loss. And we are all born to die. It's the human condition. Choices are to be made. And he gives us that choice because the book is still open. In a self-portrait, you notice he's turned away from the flowers. The flowers are memorial, ephemera, literally existing only for a short time. It's at a point when Kermit was dealing with a lot of uncertainty in his life. Major painting, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse from Revelations chapter 19. Our vision comes through what this horse represents. This is end times, all right? The horse is an albino with blue eyes, red halter, sacrifice, blood, death. The horse is seeing and waiting for its rider, for an atonement as a force of life. To the left, that fire over here is actually an eye turned on its side. Everything is turned upside down. The turtle, the coyote, the wolf is going after the lamb. The herbs are hung upside down. The moon is waning. Jerusalem is burning. This is a world at its end. It's a morality play. It's theatrical. And again, Kermit's touchstone, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. If we don't tend to our problems now, the fire is going to be worse. Nissan Morning, a celebration of spring and resurrection, but also sacrifice. This has the power of a soutine, a Francis Bacon. This is a fat-tailed sheep, all right? The crucifixion, the curtains opening like priests in the temple to the vineyards of a lush life beyond the fog, and through on this proscenium, apple is the original sin, bread for the Eucharist, the moon, fertility, mutability, the squash, animal-like, almost like intestines, like a serpentine. But again, Kermit grew up seeing this. Seeing an animal's carcass hung up was something about sustainability in terms of their livelihood. For the sake of a sacred conversation, he's having a conversation with death. He knows that where he's going to be. He's become the monkey. The monkey is also in the architectural details. And unlike the open book of Orpheus, you'll notice here the red book is closed. Conversation is closed. The red heifer, the sacrificial cow selected by Jewish priests to make ashes to anoint the ill, or a spirituality for healing. In this case, it's in South Texas. The funeral pyre, in terms of his paint quality, you can even sense the flares coming off, and then this lush Texas landscape behind. The cow's body and flames become like arabesques and serpentines. Lamb of God, shorn sheep with pomegranate. We're not free of human sin. Christ was the sacrificial lamb, giving to us redemption. Here, he's getting to the essence of the animal. The coat was protection, now exposed. The paper at the top of Christ's crucifixion is now hanging around the lamb's neck. Pomegranates, the fruit of sin and redemption, the crown of thorns in the lower left-hand corner. Also about Bonadea, pre-Raphaelite, but also Kermit looking at Van Eyck's altarpiece. The white snake is purity, the coat braided together. Again, body-to-body experience. This sheep, fertility, but also looking at us not only with an accusatory expression, but a knowing expression. Frog-bit Bosches and pink ladies, Garden of Eden. No sacred moly. The mask is camouflage, an expression. You become what you behold. A pig's mask. Very disturbing, but also going back to the myth of Circe turning Odysseus's men into pigs. The moly saved them. Communicating. In all of Kermit's works, it's really the animals that direct us where to see. And if you notice here, the eyes are constantly looking at us or each other. And I asked Kermit about it, and he says, well, the eye is always in magic, a symbol of learning. You learn of deeper, darker things that you will bring light to you, a spiritual growth. The dangled gander, again, about the crucifix, the blue cord tied around as symbol of heaven. Again, Kermit looking at himself and thinking about childhood, going into the woods. A painted bunting with an Aola underwing. Again, vanitas, our skull to skull. The paper in the lower left, the beautiful bunting as life. And his daughter Christy, in one of his more recent paintings done for Waco, You can notice that the apple core echoes the rings of the silos, the meadow lark for abundancy and impending harvest, and his daughter as Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, grains, and fertility. The book is also going to have a section on Hermes scarves, and that's very important. Started with Shelby and Lawrence Marcus in the early 80s. It also brings in Kermit's own Cherokee heritage. These are not just high fashion merchandising. For Kermit, they are paintings on silk and portable artifacts. They are instructive, and so when the wearer also bears these scarves in any form, a new message is brought forth about history, culture, nature, symbols, and ritual. So I'm going to be writing about these with new perspectives in terms of identity, language, and communication. This is the Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Conservancy scarf. And Kermit wanted to show the bounty of wildlife in Texas. And he literally counted all of the birds and animals. I mean, there's like some 60 in this scarf. And in a letter to Kermit from Janelle Kleberg, she wrote about the potential destruction of the wetlands and her gratitude to Kermit and Hermes for helping this preservation. So I just want to say a couple more things about Kermit in conclusion. I know this is a lot to, breathe in. For 6 decades, Kermit Oliver has painted out of his own sensibility as much as out of what he has seen, experienced, and read. This is the key tension in his work between Kermit as character and Kermit as observer, between the subjectivity of his brush and eye and the details, the facts, if you will. What's important is how he owns up to that, the way he asserts the necessity of not just recognizing, but also actively challenging our preconceptions and complacency, what we take for granted in the world. What Kermit really addresses is the necessity of remaining engaged and awake, of thinking for ourselves, of recognizing the world as what it is rather than what we wish it might be. What he offers in the narratives is an encapsulation of his aesthetic in which everything is in play. His stories and repertoire of characters, as distinctive as a fingerprint, convey a way of seeing, a position, and a posture in this world. Kermit Oliver is among the very few artists to genuinely bridge the divisiveness of this world. Peaceable kingdom or end times, the choice is ours. Kermit invites us to join him on this journey. He asks us to join him on a pilgrim's progress. Thank you very much. Thank you.